A slow beginning. Have you ever felt like you were running at full speed, but life suddenly switched to walking mode? There are days when you open an English learning video, understand the first 3 sentences, and then your brain quietly sighs. Your heart feels tired before your body does. And a very familiar voice in your head whispers, maybe I should quit. This video is not for people who are already fluent. It's for people who are slowing down, doubting themselves, standing right on the edge between continuing and giving up, just like me on my very first day in the United States. That day, I dragged an old suitcase across the airport floor. The wheels screamed in protest. There was no heroic background music. No cinematic moment. Just the smell of coffee mixed with metal, cold white lights, and one clear feeling. Everything here felt slower than I expected. Not because America was slow, but because I was slow to listen, slow to understand, slow to speak, even slow to breathe normally. You think you're prepared. You've watched countless learn English fast videos. You've memorized confident-sounding phrases like, nice to meet you, how are you doing, and I'm fine, thank you. But when an airport officer asks you a sentence longer than 3 seconds, your brain freezes. You hear sounds, but meaning slips away, like water running through your fingers. It's like standing under a shower and suddenly forgetting how water works. I remember nodding a lot. Nodding like a polite woodpecker. Nodding because I was scared. Nodding because I didn't want to bother anyone. Nodding because, in my mind, English was no longer a language. It was a non-stop test with no breaks. Psychology calls this cognitive overload, when your brain has to process too many new things at once, strange sounds, fast speed, social pressure. I just called it exhaustion. You might think, it's just the first day. But the slow rhythm didn't disappear. It followed me into every small task. Buying groceries. Calling to ask about rent. Talking to neighbors. Every sentence felt like walking on thin ice. You spoke slowly, afraid of mistakes. You listened slowly, afraid of misunderstanding. And slowly, you chose silence, because silence costs less energy than failure. The climate made everything feel even slower. I came from a warm place. Here, the cold wasn't just on the skin. It sank into your bones, your routines, the way people interacted. People were polite, but distant. No one rushed to ask questions. No one pushed into your personal space. You were free, and deeply alone. Your brain, already tired from language, now had to learn an entirely new way of living. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth and asked myself, why did I come here? That question sounds harmless, but it's dangerous. When motivation weakens, your brain becomes very creative at finding reasonable excuses to stop. Psychology calls this avoidance behavior, avoiding discomfort to reduce stress. You're not lazy. Your brain is just trying to protect you from repeated feelings of failure. And that's when practicing English listening, reading, and speaking turned into an emotional burden. Every video reminded me that I was slow. Every listening exercise felt like proof that I wasn't good enough. I started seeing English as an enemy, not a tool. Something to conquer quickly, instead of a friend that needs time to understand. Here's the interesting part. Science says slow learning is not bad learning. When you're stressed, your brain prioritizes survival, not memory. But when you slow down, listen slowly, speak slowly, allow mistakes, your brain finally starts building strong connections. Just like real love, it doesn't grow with fireworks. It grows through very ordinary days. So I changed one small thing. Instead of forcing myself to listen fast, I listened slowly. Instead of trying to sound fluent, I tried to sound honest. One simple sentence a day. Today is cold. I feel tired. Sounds silly. Maybe. But every correct sentence is a brick. And you don't build a house by throwing bricks from a helicopter. My first day in America didn't teach me English. It taught me patience. It taught me that some journeys don't need speed. That being slow is not failure. Being slow is sometimes the only way not to quit. And if you're still listening right now, maybe you're moving very slowly too. Trust me. That's okay. Basically, the problem isn't that you're slow. The problem is that you keep believing you're supposed to be faster. Climate shock. Have you ever noticed how weather can quietly change who you are, even before you realize it? Not in a dramatic, mover-like way, but in small daily moments, how long you pause before leaving the house, how tightly you hold your shoulders, how often you sigh for no clear reason. When I first began my life in the United States, I thought climate was just background information. I was wrong. Climate became a teacher, a challenge, and sometimes an enemy that spoke no words, but demanded constant adjustment. I arrived during a season I wasn't prepared for. The air felt sharper, heavier, like it had rules I didn't know yet. Back home, weather was something you noticed and moved on from. Here, weather decided how you dressed when you left, how fast you walked, and even how long conversations lasted outdoors. The cold didn't ask for permission. It entered your bones quietly and stayed there. And suddenly, everything slowed down. Again, not just my body, but my motivation. You wake up and the sky is gray. Not dramatic gray. Just endlessly flat. Your brain reacts before you do. Studies show that lack of sunlight affects serotonin levels, which directly influence mood and energy. But when you're living it, you don't think about neuroscience. You just feel heavier. You feel less talkative. And when you're already struggling with English, that heaviness becomes an excuse your brain loves to use. I remember standing at a bus stop one morning, hands in my pockets, shoulders tense, listening to people around me talk. Their words floated in the cold air and disappeared before I could grab them. Normally, I might have tried harder to listen. But the cold made me impatient. My brain wanted efficiency, not curiosity. It wanted to get warm, not to practice listening. So I stopped trying. I stared at the ground. Silence felt warmer than effort. Climate shock isn't just about temperature. It's about rhythm. In warmer places, people linger. Conversations stretch. In colder climates, everything is efficient. People walk faster. Small talk is shorter. Doors close quickly. None of this is rude, it's practical. But if you're learning English through real life, those missing seconds matter. Fewer pauses mean fewer chances to catch meaning. Fewer casual conversations mean fewer opportunities to practice without pressure. At first, I blamed myself. If my English were better, this wouldn't matter, I thought. But psychology suggests something else. When environmental stress increases, cold, darkness, unfamiliar routines, your cognitive resources shrink. You have less mental energy for learning. So it wasn't that I suddenly became worse at English. It was that my brain was busy adapting to survival-level details, staying warm, navigating schedules, understanding local habits. This is when many people quit quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically. They stop watching English videos regularly. They stop speaking unless necessary. They tell themselves they'll start again when things feel easier. But the problem is, things rarely feel easier on their own. Your brain adapts to avoidance very quickly. Once silence feels safe, effort feels dangerous. One evening, I noticed something uncomfortable. Days were passing, and my English wasn't improving, not because I wasn't capable, but because I was waiting for perfect conditions. Better weather. Better mood. More confidence. That moment never came. Climate had changed the outside world. But it had also reshaped my expectations. I was waiting to feel ready instead of allowing myself to feel uncomfortable. So I tried something small and slightly ridiculous. I started talking to myself about the weather, in English. Not in my head. Out loud. It is very cold today. The wind is strong. I don't like this weather, but it's okay. These sentences were simple, almost childish. But they did something important. They connected language to my immediate physical experience. My brain loves relevance. When language describes what you're feeling right now, it sticks better. There's science behind this. Context-based learning, using language tied to your environment, activates multiple areas of the brain at once. You're not just memorizing words. You're linking sound, sensation, emotion, and meaning. Suddenly, the cold wasn't just a problem. It became material. The gray sky wasn't depressing, it was vocabulary practice. I also changed how I listened. Instead of long lessons indoors, I listened to short, slow English audio while walking. The movement kept my body warm. The rhythm helped my brain stay alert. Research shows that light physical activity improves attention and memory. I didn't need motivation. I needed alignment between my body and my learning. Over time, something subtle happened. The climate didn't change, but my relationship with it did. Cold mornings became predictable instead of threatening. Short conversations felt normal instead of disappointing. And English slowly stopped feeling like an extra burden. It became part of how I processed my surroundings. Climate shock taught me this. Learning doesn't happen in ideal conditions. It happens inside real ones. You don't wait for comfort to begin. You begin, and comfort slowly follows. Just like love, just like language, adaptation doesn't rush. It adjusts. If you're learning English and your environment feels heavy, too cold, too dark, too unfamiliar, don't fight it. Use it. Describe it. Speak it. Let your reality become your textbook. Because sometimes, the climate isn't slowing you down. It's teaching you how to survive long enough to grow. Culture gap. Have you ever walked into a room where nothing is openly hostile, yet everything feels slightly wrong? No one is rude. No one is unfriendly. And still, you feel like you missed an invisible memo that everyone else received. That was my daily experience after the weather stopped shocking me and culture quietly took its place. Climate hits your body first. Culture hits your mind, and it stays there longer. In the United States, I quickly learned that many rules are unwritten. People rarely explain them, because to them, these rules feel natural. You're expected to know when to speak, how much to share, how long to maintain eye contact, and when to stop talking. None of this appears in English textbooks. But if you miss these cues, conversations feel awkward, even when your grammar is correct. Back home, conversations flowed differently. People interrupted each other warmly. Silence felt uncomfortable. Asking personal questions was a way of showing care. In the US, I noticed something else. People valued space, physical and emotional. Silence was not always a problem. It was sometimes a sign of respect. At first, I misunderstood this. I thought people were cold. Later, I realized they were careful. This difference created a strange tension when learning English. I wasn't just translating words. I was translating myself. Every time I spoke, I had to make quick decisions. Am I talking too much? Am I too quiet? Is this joke appropriate? Is this question too personal? My brain was no longer just learning language. It was running constant social calculations. And that kind of thinking is exhausting. Psychology explains this as social cognitive load. When you're unsure about social norms, your brain uses extra energy to monitor behavior. That leaves less energy for listening, understanding, and responding in another language. So even simple conversations felt heavy. Not because the English was difficult, but because the cultural context was unclear. I remember being asked a simple question, "How are you?" I gave an honest answer. I talked about my stress, my confusion, my struggles. The person nodded politely, but looked slightly uncomfortable. The conversation ended quickly. Later, I learned that in many American contexts, "How are you?" is not a real question. It's a greeting. The expected answer is short, positive, and safe. Good. Doing well. Nothing more. That moment stayed with me. Not because anyone did something wrong, but because it made me feel wrong. I started second-guessing myself. I began editing my personality before my sentences. Over time, I spoke less, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to say the wrong thing in the wrong way. This is where many language learners lose confidence. They think, my English is bad. But often, the real issue is cultural mismatch. You're not failing at language. You're adapting to a new social operating system. An adaptation takes time, patience, and a lot of quiet observation. I started watching people more closely. Not in a creepy way, just attentively. I noticed how co-workers kept conversations light at work. How neighbors waved but didn't always stop to chat. How compliments were given freely, but criticism was softened. None of this was better or worse than what I knew before. It was simply different. Instead of fighting this difference, I tried something new. I treated culture like vocabulary. I learned it in small pieces. One situation at a time. At the grocery store, I practiced short exchanges. At work, I listened more than I spoke. At home, I reflected on what felt confusing and why. This reflection mattered. Research shows that conscious reflection helps the brain integrate new social norms faster. I also gave myself permission to be imperfect. Sometimes I talked too much. Sometimes I shared too little. Sometimes conversations ended awkwardly. And that was okay. Cultural fluency, like language fluency, grows through exposure, not perfection. The goal wasn't to become someone else. It was to understand the space I was in. Slowly, something shifted. I stopped interpreting distance as rejection. I stopped seeing silence as failure. I realized that many Americans connect deeply, but they do it gradually. Trust builds slowly. Friendships unfold over time, not immediately. And suddenly, the title of my life started to make sense. Love, language, and belonging here all grew slower than expected. This realization changed how I practiced English. I stopped forcing deep conversations too soon. I focused on clear, simple communication. I respected pauses. I allowed silence. And in doing so, I felt less pressure. Less pressure meant less fear. Less fear meant better listening. Better listening meant better speaking. Culture shock didn't disappear. But it softened. It became less of a wall and more of a landscape, something to navigate, not something to fight. And in that space, I began to feel something new, patience. Not the kind that waits passively, but the kind that stays present without panic. If you're learning English and feeling socially exhausted, remember this: you're not just learning words. You're learning timing, tone, and invisible rules. That's a lot for one brain to handle. Be kind to yourself. Because sometimes, the gap you feel isn't between you and English. It's between two cultures, slowly learning how to meet in the middle. English frustration. Have you ever felt angry at a language, as if it personally decided to make your life harder? Not loud anger. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you press play on an English video, pause it after 10 seconds, and stare at the screen like it betrayed you. That was me, deep into my first months in the United States, when frustration stopped being a visitor and quietly moved in. At the beginning, English felt exciting. New sounds. New expressions. A sense of progress every time I recognized a word. But excitement doesn't last forever. What replaces it is reality. And reality is repetitive. You hear the same words again and again, yet they still don't stick. You understand a sentence today, then forget it tomorrow. You practice speaking alone, but when a real person appears, your mind goes blank. This is where frustration grows, not suddenly, but slowly, like pressure building behind a wall. I remember one evening sitting at my small kitchen table, laptop open, headphones on. I was watching a slow English video. The speaker was calm. The subtitles were clear. Everything should have worked. But my brain felt tired before the video reached 1 minute. I rewound the same sentence 3 times. I understood the words, but the meaning felt thin, like it wouldn't stay with me. That's when the thought appeared, what's wrong with me? That question is dangerous. Because frustration isn't really about English. It's about identity. When you can't express yourself, you start to feel smaller, less intelligent, less capable. You begin comparing yourself to others, people who speak smoothly, who joke effortlessly, who don't need subtitles. Your brain turns learning into a personal judgment, instead of a process. Neuroscience explains this in a simple way. Repeated failure, real or perceived, activates the brain's threat system. When that system is active, your ability to learn drops sharply. The brain isn't interested in improvement, it's interested in protection. So every time you feel frustrated, your brain quietly says, let's avoid this next time. And that's how frustration slowly turns into procrastination. I noticed this pattern in myself. I stopped practicing at the same time every day. I skipped speaking out loud. I told myself I was too busy, but the truth was simpler. English had become emotionally expensive. Each session reminded me of how far I still had to go. And my brain didn't want to pay that price anymore. One afternoon, while walking outside, I caught myself replaying a short English phrase in my head. Not because I forced it, but because it matched how I felt. I'm tired. That was it. 3 words. No grammar tricks. No fancy vocabulary. Just honesty. And for the first time in a while, English didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a mirror. That moment changed something small but important. I realized my frustration came from trying to perform, not communicate. I was trying to sound good instead of sound real. Psychology calls this performance pressure. When you focus on how you appear, you lose access to how you feel. And language, especially at the beginning, grows best when it's tied to feeling. So I changed the rules. I stopped asking, did I say it correctly? And started asking, did it match what I meant? If the answer was yes, I counted it as a win. This shift reduced pressure immediately. Less pressure meant my brain stayed open longer. And when the brain stays open, learning quietly returns. I also learned something uncomfortable. Frustration is a sign of progress. You don't get frustrated when you don't care. You get frustrated when you're close enough to see the gap. That gap hurts, but it also means you're no longer at the beginning. Your expectations have grown faster than your skills, and that mismatch creates tension. Instead of fighting that tension, I began working with it. Shorter sessions. Slower audio. Repeating one sentence until it felt natural, not perfect. Research supports this approach. Spaced repetition and low-pressure practice strengthen memory far more than intense, emotional study sessions. Consistency beats intensity every time. I started speaking English during ordinary moments. While cooking. While cleaning. While waiting at a stoplight. Not long speeches. Just comments. Observations. This smells good. I forgot the keys. These sentences weren't impressive. But they were mine. And ownership matters. When language feels owned, frustration loses its power. Gradually, I noticed something surprising. English didn't suddenly become easy, but it became lighter. I no longer felt attacked by mistakes. I expected them. I even welcomed them, because they meant I was using the language instead of hiding from it. Frustration didn't disappear. It transformed into information. A signal. Not a stop sign. If you're frustrated right now, listen carefully. That feeling doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're stretching beyond what's comfortable. That's where growth hides. The problem isn't that English is hard. The problem is expecting yourself to feel confident before you're ready. Basically, frustration isn't your enemy. It's proof that you're still trying. Loneliness season. Have you ever felt lonely even when you were surrounded by people? Not the dramatic kind of loneliness where you cry all night, but the quiet kind, the kind that sits next to you while you eat, while you scroll, while you pretend everything is fine. This was the season I didn't expect when I moved to the United States. I thought loneliness would come from being alone. Instead, it came from being unseen. In the beginning, I was busy. New place, new routines, new responsibilities. But once the excitement faded, silence became louder. People around me were polite, friendly even, but connections stayed shallow. Conversations were short. Smiles were quick. Everyone seemed to have somewhere else to go. At first, I told myself this was normal. And it was. But knowing something is normal doesn't stop it from hurting. Loneliness has a strange effect on the brain. Studies show that prolonged loneliness increases stress hormones and reduces motivation. But again, when you're living it, you don't think in scientific terms. You just feel tired for no clear reason. You feel less curious. And learning, especially learning a language, starts to feel pointless. Who are you practicing for, anyway? I remember coming home after work and sitting on the couch in complete silence. No messages. No calls. Just the hum of the refrigerator. I told myself I should practice English. I even opened a video. But my body didn't move. My brain didn't resist loudly. It simply shut down. Loneliness had quietly drained my energy. This is something many people don't talk about. Loneliness makes learning harder. Not because you're weak, but because learning is social by nature. Language exists to connect. When connection feels missing, language feels empty. You can memorize words, but without emotional context, they don't stay long. I noticed I was avoiding speaking English even more. Not just because of fear, but because of sadness. Speaking reminded me that I didn't belong yet. That my jokes didn't land. That my stories took too long to tell. Silence felt safer. Loneliness taught me how to disappear. Politely. Psychologists describe this as emotional withdrawal. When repeated social effort doesn't lead to connection, the brain reduces effort to protect itself. Again, this isn't laziness. It's survival. But survival mode is terrible for growth. And deep down, I knew that if I stayed there too long, I would shrink. One evening, something small changed. I went for a walk. Not to practice English, not to meet anyone, just to move. As I walked, I started describing things out loud, quietly. The street. The trees. The cold air. It's quiet tonight. That sentence surprised me. Not because it was advanced, but because it was true. English, for the first time in a while, matched my emotional state. That's when I realized something important. I had been waiting to feel happy before using English. But maybe English could be used to express loneliness, not escape it. Language doesn't require happiness. It requires honesty. When I allowed myself to use simple English to describe how I felt, something softened. There's research behind this too. Naming emotions, even in a second language, reduces emotional intensity. It helps the brain process feelings instead of avoiding them. So when I said, I feel lonely, I wasn't just practicing English. I was regulating my nervous system. Slowly, I built a new habit. I talked to myself in English during lonely moments. Not motivational speeches. Just observations. Today was long. I miss home. This is hard, but I'm here. These sentences weren't meant to impress anyone. They were meant to keep me company. And something unexpected happened. English stopped feeling like a wall between me and others. It became a bridge between me and myself. When you feel understood by your own words, even simple ones, loneliness loses some of its power. This didn't magically give me friends. It didn't fix everything. But it changed my posture. I walked a little straighter. I listened more openly. And slowly, real connections began to appear, not many, not fast, but enough. A coworker who stayed an extra minute to talk. A neighbor who asked a follow-up question. Small moments. Real ones. Loneliness didn't disappear. It evolved. It became a background feeling instead of a controlling force. And my English practice changed with it. I no longer studied to catch up. I practiced to stay present. To stay human. If you're learning English and feeling lonely, please hear this. Loneliness doesn't mean you're failing at life or language. It means you're in between who you were and who you're becoming. That space is uncomfortable, but it's also where growth begins. Sometimes, the loneliest seasons teach you the most important skill of all. How to stay with yourself until connection returns. Unexpected connection. Have you ever noticed that the most important connections in life rarely arrive with a clear announcement? They don't knock loudly. They don't say, "This will change everything." They usually enter quietly, almost unnoticed, while you're busy managing your own exhaustion. That's how it happened for me. Right in the middle of loneliness, language frustration, and cultural confusion, something unexpected appeared, not fast, not dramatic, but steady enough to make me pause. I didn't meet this person in a romantic way. No sparks. No instant chemistry. Meeting someone who makes silence feel safe is rare. With them, pauses didn't feel like failure. They felt natural. Our early conversations were simple. Almost boring. Weather. Work. Daily routines. Short sentences. Clear words. No pressure to be funny or impressive. And strangely, that simplicity made English easier. My brain wasn't fighting for survival. It wasn't predicting judgment. It was listening. There's a psychological reason for this. When you feel emotionally safe, your brain reduces threat responses. That frees up cognitive space for learning and memory. In simple terms, safety makes language stick. I didn't know that back then. I just knew I wasn't tired after talking to them. This connection grew slowly. So slowly that I didn't even label it at first. It didn't feel like romance. It felt like consistency. We talked regularly, but not constantly. We shared stories, but not everything. There was no rush to define anything. And that was new for me. I was used to intensity, fast bonding, fast expectations. This was different. This was calm. And here's the surprising part. Calm felt uncomfortable at first. When you've lived in stress for a long time, peace feels suspicious. My brain kept asking, is this going anywhere? Am I wasting time? Shouldn't love feel louder? Those questions weren't about the other person. They were about my impatience. At the same time, my English was changing. Not dramatically, but noticeably. I started speaking more naturally, not because I knew more words, but because I wasn't afraid of pauses. If I didn't know a word, I described it. If I made a mistake, I corrected it without panic. Conversation became cooperative instead of performative. I realized something important. Connection doesn't demand fluency. It rewards clarity and presence. You don't need perfect grammar to be understood. You need intention. And intention shows up when you're not rushing. We also navigated cultural differences. In my culture, emotional closeness builds quickly. In theirs, it builds carefully. At first, I misread distance as lack of interest. But over time, I saw something else. Interest was there, it just moved slowly. Trust came before intensity. Consistency came before emotion. This pace taught me patience in a way English lessons never could. Waiting for a message. Accepting silence without assuming rejection. Allowing conversations to end naturally. These moments trained my nervous system. And a regulated nervous system is one of the most powerful tools for learning a language. Research supports this. Emotional regulation improves working memory and comprehension. When you're calm, you hear more. You understand more. You respond better. Love didn't just affect my heart. It quietly supported my brain. There were misunderstandings, of course. Cultural assumptions. Language gaps. Moments where tone didn't translate well. But instead of exploding into conflict, these moments became opportunities to clarify. This is what I meant. This is how it feels to me. Simple sentences. Honest intent. Over time, something shifted inside me. I stopped measuring progress in speed. I stopped asking how fast things were moving. Instead, I asked if things felt stable. And stability changed everything. My English practice became consistent. My emotions became manageable. My expectations softened. This connection didn't fix my loneliness overnight. But it gave loneliness a boundary. It reminded me that connection doesn't have to be loud to be real. It can be quiet. It can grow slowly. It can exist alongside uncertainty. If you're learning English and feeling impatient with yourself, with others, with life, pay attention to this. Growth often arrives disguised as boredom. Love often arrives disguised as neutrality. And learning often happens when you stop pushing and start staying. Unexpected connections don't rush you. They teach you that slow doesn't mean stuck. It means something is being built carefully. Love and language. The strange thing about love and language is that they grow in similar ways, quietly, awkwardly, and usually slower than you want them to. By the time I realized this, the connection in my life was no longer just a pleasant routine. It had become something more delicate. Something that required attention, patience, and a willingness to stay present even when things felt unclear. At this stage, English was no longer just a personal challenge. It had entered my relationship. Conversations were no longer only about daily routines or safe topics. Emotions began to appear. Opinions. Expectations. And suddenly, the limits of my language felt painfully obvious. I could describe the weather easily. I could talk about work. But explaining how I felt, that was harder. When feelings deepen, words matter more. Tone matters more. Timing matters more. And when English is not your first language, every emotional conversation feels risky. You worry about sounding cold when you mean calm. You worry about sounding distant when you mean thoughtful. You worry that the wrong word might create the wrong story in someone else's mind. This created a new kind of pressure. I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was practicing vulnerability in a second language. Psychology tells us that emotional expression already requires courage. Doing it in another language doubles the effort. Your brain is translating feelings and grammar at the same time, and that's exhausting. There were moments when silence felt easier than explanation. Moments when I chose short answers, because I didn't trust my words. But silence has weight too. Silence can protect, but it can also confuse. I learned quickly that avoiding language doesn't avoid misunderstanding, it often creates more of it. So I started doing something uncomfortable. I slowed conversations down. I warned the other person when I needed time. I need a moment to explain. I'm trying to find the right words. These sentences weren't elegant, but they were honest. And honesty created space. Something interesting happened when I allowed myself to speak slowly. The other person slowed down too. They listened more carefully. They asked clarifying questions instead of assuming meaning. The conversation became a shared effort instead of a performance. That shift changed everything. From a learning perspective, this was powerful. Research shows that negotiated meaning, when both people work together to understand, significantly improves language acquisition. I wasn't just practicing English. I was practicing connection through English. And that made the language stick in a deeper way. Love also exposed cultural differences more clearly. In my background, love is often expressed through sacrifice and emotional intensity. In American culture, love often shows up as respect for independence and personal space. At first, this felt confusing. Distance felt like disinterest. Calm felt like lack of passion. But over time, I noticed consistency. Calls were returned. Promises were kept. Support appeared quietly. Without drama. Love wasn't loud, but it was reliable. And that reliability taught me a new emotional vocabulary, one that English actually handled well. Words like steady, clear, safe. As my emotional understanding grew, my English followed. I learned phrases not from textbooks, but from real needs. I feel overwhelmed. I need reassurance. This matters to me. These sentences became part of my daily language, because they were part of my daily life. Emotion gave language a reason to stay. Of course, mistakes still happened. There were moments when a joke sounded serious. Moments when a serious sentence sounded harsh. But instead of retreating, I learned to repair. That's not what I meant. Let me try again. Repair is an advanced communication skill, and love forced me to practice it earlier than I expected. This stage taught me something important. Fluency is not about speed. It's about accuracy of meaning. Being understood matters more than sounding smooth. And love rewards effort, not perfection. When someone cares, they listen past your mistakes. Gradually, I stopped seeing English as a barrier between us. It became a bridge, sometimes shaky, sometimes narrow, but always usable. And the more I trusted that bridge, the stronger it became. Confidence didn't come from knowing all the words. It came from surviving misunderstandings and realizing the connection was still there. If you're learning English through real relationships, this part can feel scary. Emotions raise the stakes. But they also raise motivation. You care more, so you try more. And trying, even imperfectly, is how language becomes alive. Love and language don't grow by being rushed. They grow by being used gently, honestly. And often. And sometimes, the slowest conversations are the ones that change you the most. Marriage reality. Marriage did not arrive as a dramatic turning point. It arrived quietly, disguised as paperwork, conversations about schedules, and long pauses where both of us were trying to understand what we were actually agreeing to. By the time we talked seriously about marriage, love was already there, but reality was waiting patiently behind it, ready to speak up. Getting married in the United States is not just an emotional decision. It is a legal one. A practical one. A cultural one. Suddenly, love had forms to fill out, rules to follow, and systems that didn't care how romantic our story was. Visas, insurance, taxes, housing contracts. Each document used formal English, precise, emotionless, unforgiving. This was a new kind of language challenge. At first, I underestimated how much this would affect me. I thought marriage would make things easier, emotionally safer. In some ways, it did. But it also removed excuses. I could no longer hide behind "I'm new" or "I don't understand yet." Marriage demanded participation. It demanded decisions. And decisions demanded language. Daily life changed too. Love was no longer just about connection. It was about coordination. Who pays which bill? Who handles which responsibility? How time is divided between work, rest, and family. These conversations sound simple, but they are full of assumptions shaped by culture. In my background, roles were often implied. In American culture, roles are discussed, negotiated, and sometimes renegotiated. This created friction, not because either of us was wrong, but because expectations were invisible. I assumed certain things would happen naturally. My partner assumed things needed to be spoken clearly. English suddenly became the tool that revealed differences instead of hiding them. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed. Not emotionally, but mentally. Marriage required a level of clarity I wasn't used to expressing. Saying, "I love you" was easy. Saying, "I need help with this," or "this doesn't feel fair to me," required courage and vocabulary. When language is limited, people often retreat into silence or irritation. I felt both. Psychology explains this clearly. When communication feels difficult, the brain seeks shortcuts. Tone replaces words. Assumptions replace questions. That's when conflict grows. Not from big problems, but from small misunderstandings repeated over time. Marriage didn't create these issues. It simply exposed them. I remember one disagreement that had nothing to do with emotions. It was about time. I felt we weren't spending enough of it together. My partner felt we were spending enough, just differently. We were using the same words, enough, busy, tired, but attaching different meanings to them. English wasn't failing us. Precision was. So we slowed things down. We explained instead of reacted. I learned to say, "When this happens, I feel this." Not accusations. Observations. That structure mattered. Research in communication psychology shows that descriptive language reduces defensiveness and increases understanding. Simple sentence frames saved us more than once. Marriage also changed how I practiced English. It was no longer optional. Language was part of survival, not dramatic survival, but daily life survival. Grocery lists, doctor appointments, school forms, family conversations. I wasn't learning English to improve myself anymore. I was learning it to function as part of a unit. Interestingly, this pressure didn't make English harder. It made it clearer. Motivation shifted from abstract improvement to concrete usefulness. When language solves real problems, the brain prioritizes it. That's not inspiration. That's neuroscience. Cultural differences still appeared, especially around conflict. In my culture, emotions rise quickly and settle quickly. In American culture, emotions are often controlled, processed privately, and discussed calmly later. At first, this felt like avoidance. Later, I understood it as regulation. Neither approach was superior. They just required translation. Marriage forced me to grow emotionally and linguistically at the same time. I had to learn how to pause instead of react. How to choose words instead of volume. How to listen without planning my response. These are advanced communication skills, even in your first language. Learning them in English was slow, uncomfortable, and deeply transformative. There were days when I missed simplicity. Days when I thought love was supposed to feel lighter than this. But then I noticed something important. Despite the effort, despite the misunderstandings, we were still choosing to stay. Still choosing to clarify instead of escape. Still choosing patience over pride. That's when marriage revealed its real lesson. Love doesn't remove difficulty. It changes how you face it. And language doesn't need to be perfect to support love. It needs to be honest, consistent, and used. Marriage in the United States taught me structure. It taught me boundaries. It taught me that commitment isn't about intensity, it's about showing up, especially when communication feels hard. And through that process, my English stopped being fragile. It became functional, grounded, and real. Marriage didn't make life easier. It made it clearer. And clarity, slowly learned, is one of the strongest forms of love. Family and children. Family life did not begin with a clear plan. It unfolded gradually, through routines that repeated until they became normal, and responsibilities that arrived before I felt fully ready for them. When children entered our lives, everything slowed down again, but this time, the slowness felt heavier and more meaningful. Love was no longer just something we talked about. It became something we had to organize, protect, and explain. Raising a family in the United States introduced a new layer of cultural and linguistic complexity. Suddenly, English was everywhere. Doctor visits, school emails, parent-teacher meetings, forms that required signatures and confidence. I wasn't just learning English for myself anymore. I was learning it so my children could feel safe, understood, and represented. At first, this responsibility felt overwhelming. I worried about misunderstanding instructions. I worried about missing important details. I worried about sounding incompetent when asking questions. These fears were quiet, but constant. Parenting already stretches your emotional capacity. Doing it in a second language stretches your cognitive capacity too. Children, however, don't wait for perfection. They live in the present. They ask questions without shame. They repeat themselves without embarrassment. Watching them learn language reminded me of something I had forgotten. Language is not meant to be impressive. It's meant to be useful. At home, English and my native language mixed freely. Sometimes in the same sentence. At first, I worried this would confuse my children. Research shows the opposite. Children raised in bilingual environments develop strong cognitive flexibility. They learn early that meaning matters more than form. Watching this happen in real time was humbling. Family life also exposed cultural differences in parenting. In American culture, independence is encouraged early. Children are taught to express opinions, ask questions, and make choices. In my background, guidance was more direct. Authority was clearer. Adjusting to this difference required patience, from me and from my partner. Conversations about parenting styles were some of the hardest we had. Not because we disagreed deeply, but because explaining values requires precise language. Saying, "This is how I was raised," is easy. Explaining why it matters emotionally is not. These discussions forced me to stretch my English in new ways. Words like balance, boundaries, support, and expectations became part of my daily vocabulary. There were moments when I felt behind. Other parents spoke confidently at school meetings. They joked easily with teachers. I smiled and listened, translating slowly in my head. My brain worked overtime, and by the time I understood, the moment had passed. This used to frustrate me. Now, I saw it differently. Listening is not weakness. It's preparation. Family routines became unexpected language lessons. Reading bedtime stories out loud. Singing simple songs. Explaining rules repeatedly. Repetition, it turns out, is powerful. Neuroscience shows that repeated exposure in emotionally safe environments strengthens memory. Teaching my children English strengthened mine too. There were also emotional lessons. Children sense stress before words explain it. When I felt overwhelmed, they noticed. When I struggled with English, they watched how I handled it. Did I get angry? Did I avoid? Or did I try again? Calmly. Modeling resilience mattered more than modeling fluency. One evening, my child corrected my English gently. Not to embarrass me, but to help. That moment stayed with me. Roles had shifted. Learning had become mutual. Language was no longer a hierarchy. It was a shared project. Family life also changed how I thought about patience. Children grow slowly, in bursts. They regress. They repeat mistakes. They test limits. Expecting constant progress is unrealistic. That realization softened how I treated myself. If I could be patient with a child learning to speak, I could be patient with myself learning to communicate. Cultural differences appeared even in small things: school lunches, holiday traditions, discipline methods. Instead of seeing these as problems, I began to see them as opportunities. Opportunities to explain, to ask, to blend. Language became the bridge that allowed two cultures to coexist in one household. Over time, English stopped feeling like an external requirement. It became the language of family logistics, shared jokes, bedtime comfort, and difficult conversations. Not perfect. Not poetic. But deeply functional. And function, I learned, is a form of fluency. Family and children didn't simplify my life. They complicated it in meaningful ways. They forced me to communicate even when I was tired. They required clarity even when emotions ran high. Through them, English became less about self-improvement and more about care. If you're learning English while building a family, understand this. Progress may feel slower, but it is deeper. Every word you learn now carries responsibility and love. That weight makes it harder, but also more powerful. Family taught me that patience is not passive. It is active, daily, and often invisible. And sometimes, the slowest growth is the one that lasts the longest. Small daily habits. By the time my life felt a little more stable, I realized something important. Big changes did not come from big decisions. They came from small daily habits. At first, I did not believe that simple routines could change anything. I thought improvement had to be dramatic. I thought love needed grand gestures, and language needed perfect grammar. But daily life in America slowly taught me a different lesson. Every morning began quietly. I woke up before the rest of the house. The kitchen was silent, except for the soft sound of the coffee machine. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. This became my first habit. I did not scroll on my phone. I did not rush. I simply sat there and spoke English out loud, very softly. I described what I could see. The sky is pale today. The street is still empty. The air feels cold. These sentences were simple. Sometimes they felt childish, but they helped my mind wake up. In English, not in fear. Another habit came during breakfast. My partner and I made a rule. No phones at the table. No news. No distractions. We talked about small things. What we dreamed about last night. What we planned to cook for dinner. What made us tired or happy the day before. Sometimes my English was slow. Sometimes I searched for words. But I did not apologize anymore. I learned that communication was not about speed. It was about honesty. In the past, I used to stay quiet when I felt unsure. Now, I spoke even when my sentences were imperfect. This habit changed our relationship deeply. During the day, another routine guided me. I carried a small notebook everywhere. Whenever I heard a new word, I wrote it down. Not long lists. Just 1 or 2 words at a time. At night, I returned to those words. I did not memorize them like a student. I used them in short sentences about my life. This word reminds me of today. This word explains how I felt. Language became personal, not academic. Love also lived in habits. Not in anniversaries or gifts, but in small actions. I learned to ask one simple question every evening. How was your day? Really? And then I listened without interrupting. Some days, the answer was short. Some days, it was heavy. But asking consistently built trust. Listening became an act of love. There were habits I had to unlearn too. I stopped comparing our life to others. I stopped expecting happiness to look perfect. I stopped believing that struggles meant failure. Instead, I learned to notice progress. A conversation that felt easier. A misunderstanding that ended calmly. A moment of laughter after a hard day. One habit surprised me the most. Writing before sleep. Every night, I wrote 3 sentences in English. Not long paragraphs. Just 3 honest lines about the day. I felt proud today. I felt tired but loved. I learned something new. These sentences grounded me. They reminded me that growth was happening, even when I could not feel it. There were still hard days. Days when my English felt broken again. Days when love felt distant. But habits carried me through those moments. When emotions were messy, routine stayed steady. Over time, my partner noticed the change. I was calmer. More confident. More present. I noticed it too. I stopped waiting to become good enough. I lived as I was. Small habits taught me patience. They taught me consistency. They taught me that showing up every day mattered more than being perfect once. In marriage, these habits built safety. In language, they built fluency. In myself, they built peace. Life in America did not become easier overnight. But it became lighter. Not because everything improved, but because I learned how to move through life gently. Each habit was small, almost invisible. But together, they changed everything. And that was the moment I understood something clearly. A meaningful life is not created in big moments. It is built quietly, every single day. Patience tested. There came a time when all my small habits were no longer enough. Life decided to test my patience in ways I did not expect. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There was no single moment of collapse. Instead, pressure arrived quietly, day after day. My English suddenly felt fragile again. Conversations moved faster than my thoughts. Jokes passed over my head. Instructions sounded unclear. I nodded more than I understood. I smiled when I felt confused. Inside, frustration began to grow. At the same time, my marriage entered a difficult season. Not because of anger. Not because of betrayal. But because of exhaustion. We were both tired. Work demanded more energy. Life demanded more responsibility. There were fewer pauses. Fewer soft moments. Small misunderstandings felt heavier than before. A wrong tone. A late reply. A silence that lasted too long. I started questioning myself again. Was my English holding me back? Was I becoming a burden? Was love supposed to feel this hard? Patience became harder to practice. Some days, I reacted too quickly. I spoke before listening. I defended myself when no attack existed. Other days, I withdrew. I stayed quiet to avoid conflict. I told myself silence was peace. But silence only created distance. The hardest part was not external pressure. It was the voice inside my head. It said I was too slow, too sensitive, too different. This voice returned late at night, when everything was quiet. It questioned every choice I had made. It replayed mistakes in 2 languages. During this period, my habits changed shape. Morning coffee felt rushed. Evening writing felt forced. Listening felt heavier than speaking. Progress seemed to disappear. One night, after a long and tense day, I finally spoke honestly. Not perfectly. Not calmly. But truthfully. I said I was tired of trying to be strong all the time. I said I felt lost again. I said patience was slipping through my fingers. My partner listened. Not with solutions. Not with advice. Just with presence. That night did not fix everything. But it slowed things down. I realized something important. Patience is not endless calm. It is choosing not to give up, even when calm disappears. The next weeks were difficult. We argued more openly. We clarified expectations. We learned each other's limits. In English, I stopped pretending to understand. I asked people to repeat themselves. I asked for time. I allowed pauses. At first, this felt embarrassing. Then it felt freeing. I learned that patience includes asking for help. It includes admitting weakness. It includes forgiving yourself for being human. Some days still tested me deeply. A bad conversation. A misunderstood message. A moment when I felt invisible again. But now, I noticed something new. I recovered faster. Instead of staying stuck for days, I returned to balance within hours. Instead of blaming myself, I observed my emotions. I said, today is heavy. Not, I am failing. This shift changed everything. Patience stopped being a personality trait. It became a daily decision. In marriage, patience meant staying at the table during hard conversations. In language, it meant accepting slow progress without shame. In life, it meant trusting the process even when the path felt unclear. One evening, while walking quietly together, my partner said something simple. You're different now. I asked what that meant. The answer surprised me. You don't panic when things go wrong, they said. You pause. That pause became my new strength. I did not fix everything. I did not suddenly become fluent or fearless. But I became steady. Patience tested me by removing comfort. By bringing doubt back into my life. By forcing me to face myself without illusions. And slowly, I passed that test. Not because I endured without pain. But because I learned to stay present with it. This season taught me that patience is not passive. It is active courage. It is waking up after a hard night and trying again. It is choosing connection over pride. It is believing that growth continues, even in silence. By the end of that season, I was not stronger in the way I expected. I was softer. And somehow, that made me stronger than before. A gentle, happy ending. The ending did not arrive with applause. There was no sudden moment of victory. No dramatic turning point that changed everything at once. Instead, happiness arrived quietly. It came on an ordinary morning, when the house was still half asleep. Light slipped through the curtains. The air felt calm, not rushed. I noticed my breathing before my worries. For the first time in a long while, my mind was not racing ahead. It stayed right there, in the present moment. Life had not become perfect. Problems still existed. Responsibilities still waited. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer measured my worth by how fast I spoke English. I no longer judged my marriage by how easy it looked from the outside. I stopped chasing a version of life that never truly existed. Instead, I began to accept what was real. Conversations felt slower, but warmer. Mistakes felt less threatening. Silence felt less frightening. I noticed how much patience had reshaped me. Not loudly. Not proudly. But deeply. My partner and I did not talk about happiness often. We talked about logistics. About schedules. About everyday things. Yet beneath those conversations lived something steady. Trust. Respect. A shared understanding that love was something we practiced, not something we performed. English became part of that practice. I spoke it imperfectly, but honestly. I listened without panic. I accepted pauses as part of communication, not as failure. There were moments when I realized how far I had come. Ordering food without rehearsing first. Joking softly in conversation. Expressing emotions without translating them in my head. These moments did not feel extraordinary. They felt natural. And that was the miracle. Happiness, I learned, does not always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels peaceful. Sometimes it feels quiet. Sometimes it feels like nothing special at all. One evening, after dinner, we sat together without speaking. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing needed fixing. I looked around the room. The familiar furniture. The small imperfections. The life we had built slowly. And I felt something settle inside me. Belonging. Not to a country. Not to a language. But to this life. The journey had not erased my struggles. It had transformed my relationship with them. I still made mistakes. I still felt tired. I still had days when confidence faded. But I trusted myself now. I trusted the process. I trusted time. That trust was my gentle happy ending. It taught me that growth does not announce itself. It reveals itself in calm reactions. In softer thoughts. In the ability to rest without guilt. Looking back, I no longer focused on what was lost. I honored what was learned. Patience taught me to slow down. Love taught me to stay. Language taught me to listen. Together, they shaped a life that felt real. If this story has taught me anything, it is this. Happiness is not a destination reached at full speed. It is something discovered when you stop running. It exists in ordinary mornings. In imperfect conversations. In choosing kindness when frustration would be easier. It lives in small habits. In steady effort. In gentle acceptance. My life in America did not turn into a dream. It turned into something better. It became honest. And honesty, I learned, is the most peaceful form of happiness. This ending may not look impressive. It may not inspire envy, but it feels right. And sometimes, that is more than enough. A final thought before you go. Love did not grow fast in this story. And neither did confidence. Neither did English. But that is exactly why this story matters. Because real love does not rush. Real change does not arrive overnight. And real progress in learning English rarely looks dramatic. It looks like quiet mornings. It looks like small sentences spoken with courage. It looks like choosing patience when quitting feels easier. If you are learning English and feel stuck, slow, or discouraged, this story is not here to impress you. It is here to remind you that going slowly is not failing. Sometimes, the slowest growth creates the strongest roots. And maybe, just maybe, the love you are building, with a person, with a language, or with yourself, is growing more deeply than you realize. If this story resonated with you, stay with this channel. Because here, we don't chase fast English. We build real English through real stories. Stories about life in America. Stories about culture, marriage, family, and emotions. Stories that help you listen better, read more naturally, and speak with confidence, one calm step at a time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Like this video if slow, meaningful English learning feels right for you. Leave a comment and tell me, do you believe patience can build real love and real English? More stories are coming. Slower, deeper, and more honest. Thank you for staying until the end. Your journey is not behind you. It is just beginning.